The streets are quiet in a way that feels deliberate, not the silence of early morning or late night, but the absence that stretches across entire weeks. Windows remain dark along residential blocks where porches collect pine needles undisturbed. Driveways sit empty under snow that no one clears. The lake reflects mountains and sky with perfect clarity, watched by homes that do not watch back. Mail accumulates in boxes. Motion sensor lights never trigger. There are no footprints between houses, no voices carrying through cold air, no cars warming up before dawn. The infrastructure of life remains intact, roads maintained, utilities connected, structures sound. But the rhythms that once animated these spaces have gone silent. Something has been subtracted from the landscape, leaving behind only the physical evidence of habitation without the inhabitants themselves.
There was a time when Lake Tahoe belonged to the people who shoveled its driveways in December and swept its porches in June. Teachers lived within walking distance of schools. Shop owners opened the same doors every morning, year after year. Children grew up knowing which neighbors kept their baseballs, which dogs barked at strangers, which houses always had their lights on after dark. Winters meant wood smoke rising from chimneys at 5 p.m, cars with tire chains parked outside all season, laundry hanging in mudrooms. People recognized each other at the grocery store, not as tourists passing through, but as familiar faces woven into the fabric of daily existence. The lake was backdrop to ordinary life, commutes and parent-teacher conferences and Friday nights and broken water heaters. Place and people were inseparable, bound together by the unglamorous persistence of simply staying.
The change arrived without announcement, written in gradual shifts too subtle to mark with precision. A house would sell, and the new owners would arrive with different intentions. They loved the lake just as deeply, perhaps, but loved it the way one loves a destination rather than a home. The distinction seemed minor at first. A family that visited monthly instead of living permanently still contributed, still cared. But each transaction carried forward a quiet transformation in how the place was understood. Properties began to be described in terms of their potential for escape, rather than their capacity to contain a life. The language shifted from residence to retreat, from neighborhood to location. Investment logic crept into conversations that once centered on community. What had been streets became portfolios. What had been homes became assets optimized for the market value of intermittent use.
Weekends swelled with temporary presence while weekdays hollowed out. Friday afternoons brought caravans from distant cities, cars loaded with supplies for short stays. The same faces appeared seasonally during ski months or summer warmth, then vanished for long stretches. Restaurants learned to staff for peaks and endure valleys. The rhythm of occupation became tidal, surging and receding on schedules determined elsewhere. Those who worked service jobs found themselves serving part-time residents whose attachment to place operated on fundamentally different terms. The visitors were not hostile or indifferent, but their needs were calibrated to brief immersion rather than sustained coexistence. They arrived to consume the experience of the lake, then returned to wherever their actual lives continued. The town began to pulse rather than breathe, its presence concentrated into compressed intervals separated by extensive absence.
Schools watched enrollment decline as families with children found themselves unable to remain. Teachers who once lived nearby began commuting from distant towns, where housing remained attainable for people whose value was measured in salaries rather than assets. Emergency services struggled to maintain staffing when responders could not afford to live within the communities they served. Grocery stores adjusted inventory for populations that swelled and contracted unpredictably. The infrastructure of year-round life, built over generations, found itself supporting a population that existed only intermittently. There was no villain in this process, no moment of deliberate harm. The mechanisms were impersonal, operating according to logic that considered housing as commodity rather than foundation. Those who left did not choose to abandon place. They were simply outbid by those who could afford to leave properties empty most of the year.
Walk through residential areas on a Tuesday in November and count the darkened windows. Houses stand in perfect condition, paint fresh, roofs intact, landscaping maintained by services that arrive and depart on schedule. Inside, furniture waits unused. Kitchens remain spotless because no one cooks in them for months at a time. Beds are made for guests who appear a handful of weekends each year. These are not abandoned buildings, but suspended ones, held in a state of perpetual readiness for occupants who are elsewhere. The houses function as containers for potential use rather than sites of continuous inhabitation. They are maintained not as homes, but as preserved experiences, vacation properties kept pristine for the brief intervals when owners remember to visit. The architecture of community remains standing, while the community itself has been exported to wherever the owners primarily reside.
Those who arrive now carry different relationships to permanence. They are attached to Lake Tahoe as an idea, a cherished retreat, a wise investment, a place they genuinely love. But their attachment does not require them to endure its winters continuously, or navigate its daily frustrations, or weave their children's lives into its schools and friendships. They can afford the luxury of selecting only the best moments while maintaining their actual social and professional lives elsewhere. Meanwhile, those who once provided year-round continuity have dispersed. They work in the valley but live in less expensive towns hours away. They remember Lake Tahoe not as a place they visit, but as a place they left, forced out not by choice but by arithmetic. Wealth, transient in its presence, has replaced permanence that lacked sufficient capital. The lake has not changed, but the terms of belonging to it have been fundamentally rewritten. From a distance, everything appears normal. Buildings occupy their lots, streets are plowed, businesses open according to posted hours. A visitor might not immediately notice what is missing because the physical environment so convincingly mimics an inhabited place. Only with attention does the absence become apparent. The lack of casual pedestrian traffic on weekday afternoons, the same few cars circling through service jobs, the missing texture of overlapping lives creating unplanned encounters. The town functions, but it functions as a stage set rather than a living community. All the props remain in place, while the cast has been replaced by rotating guests who perform a choreographed version of mountain life before returning to their primary roles elsewhere. The simulation is maintained with remarkable fidelity, but a simulation is what it has become, hollowed out and then carefully preserved in appearance only. This pattern is not unique to Lake Tahoe. It repeats wherever natural beauty and limited geography collide with wealth seeking refuge or investment seeking returns. Coastal villages and mountain towns and island communities face the same quiet transformation. The mechanism is consistent. Housing shifts from infrastructure supporting local life to commodity enabling temporary access. The places themselves become products consumed by those who can afford intermittent ownership, while those who might live there continuously are priced into displacement. No laws are broken, no one intends harm. The process unfolds through countless individual transactions, each logical from narrow perspectives, collectively producing landscapes where place and people have been decoupled. What remains are locations perfected for visiting, preserved as experiences to be periodically accessed, emptied of the continuous human presence that once gave them meaning.
Lake Tahoe remains as beautiful as it has ever been. The water holds the same impossible blue. Mountains rise with the same dramatic presence. The environment that drew people here continues unchanged. But the people themselves, the ones who stayed through all seasons and built lives rather than visited them, have largely gone. Their houses stand occupied only by absence most days. The schools and shops and services persist in diminished form, serving a population that is no longer primarily there. What has been lost is not the place, but the living relationship to it, the texture of sustained human presence that transforms location into home. The homes remain, the locals do not. And in the silence between occupied weekends, Lake Tahoe waits, preserved and emptied, belonging fully to no one who stays.